go about doing a good job of recruitment. Okay, so this is very important because this all depends on what your organization has told you, right? So what they have told the recruiting team as to what they should be looking for and what kind of a candidate do we not want for the organization. For what duration are we looking for? Once this is done, then we go to the recruitment plan. So based on the job analysis, when you go through the job analysis data, become very clear with it, and then you decide how many candidates you should be able to target. And then comes your strategy. So what is the right number of candidates that you should target? Like how Melvin said, that it's a positive process that you should be able to increase the pool of candidates. So to which of these sources are you going to go where you can increase this pool of candidates so that it makes selection a lot more easier and you can go ahead with that process of identifying the right person for the right job. And then you need to choose your channels. Which are the sources of recruitment channels that you have to target? And then what are you going to say? Inducements, right? So what are the attractive points that you're going to talk about your organization? Are you going to talk about organization culture? Are you going to talk about the workforce environment inside? Are you going to talk about diversity and inclusiveness? Are you going to talk about compensation, rewards, benefits, career growth? Okay, so you should be able to do some research to find out what will candidates in this particular category look for generally. Let's say, for example, now you are candidates who are going to be coming out of this course and then you are going to be looking for a job, right? So you're going to be looking for an entry-level job in management. So recruiters will have to do some research, talk to some of these candidates or do some interviews with them and then find out what are these freshers usually looking for. Are freshers more attractive about money, salary? Or freshers more interested in choosing a job that will become a right career? Or freshers are they more interested in trying to ensure that they work in an organization where the culture is really good, where they get along well and there is a lot of scope for learning? Or are they looking at joining an organization where there is a lot of growth perspective? So there are different reasons. Every individual will have different reasons, and we cannot club all of these reasons together and say this is exactly what they want. Right? So you should be able to know what freshers are wanting, know what mid-level, mid-career candidates who are looking for a change of job or change of career looking for, or what are top-level candidates looking for when they are looking at switching over organizations and taking up opportunities in their organization. So you should be able to know the mind of these candidates so that you will be able to pitch the right inducements. And I told you rightly that you're going to be the salesperson or the sales ambassador of your organization. You should be able to know what your organization can offer to them and what they are looking for in your organization. And then accordingly choose your message, right? If it's very realistic or whether you want to just exaggerate a little bit, like how advertisements do, so you can also experiment a little more on that just to make that message more attractive. The reason is because you're not the only recruiting company, or you're not the only firm that has a vacancy and is looking for candidates. Every other organization is looking for the right candidate. So if you are the candidate, you have about 6 companies that are targeting you. 6 companies that are telling you that come and join my organization because the kind of experience that you will get is much more better than what you will get in any other organization. So you have a choice. So if that's the kind of competition, then recruiting team and the organization will have to do a good job of trying to make sure that the inducement message goes across to the candidate, and the candidate will be able to apply to your organization. And as I said, then we go into the activities. So once the planning is done, then we go target the resources, then we send out messages, then we share content. And if there is some kind of a one-on-one that we need to have, or a one-to-many kind of placement orientation or recruitment orientation that some of these agencies or sources would want us to do, then we do that. Like for example, on a campus, you have a company representative coming and giving you an orientation about their organization. So that such kind of activity also needs to be done, right? And then identifying sources and then checking with the various sources, source contacts to know whether any candidate is interested or whether they are able to go ahead and get the kind of numbers that they're looking for. You've got to do all of this and also maintain a track record of what is happening so that You can always go back to some sources that have given you some good results. You can always go back to some candidates who also been very prospective, but you did not select them. You can go to some past candidates. And all of this data that you are going to compile of every recruitment activity will be of use to you at some point of time. And then we have screening and selecting employees, which is the selection process. Once all the recruitment activities are over, and then we have all the CVs lined up in front of us, then we are going to be taking that up and then sending those CVs to the selection committee or selection panel, and the selection panel will put these candidates for several rounds, and then they will decide. And then once selection is over is where we do the evaluation. So evaluation of recruitment is going and checking the appraisal, finding the appraisal of the recruiters. Right? So whatever was the activity that was given to the recruitment team. So for example, if we said we needed to fill up 15 jobs, have all the 15 jobs been filled up? Right after the selection is over, were all the 15 jobs, where the selection team able to identify 15 candidates who can take up that job? Secondly, in what time did these 15 candidates come about, which means the recruitment activity? How long did it take? Did it take about 14 days? Did it take about 30 days? Did it take about 45 days? And then, depending on the budget that was given to you, how much did you spend on an average? What is the average cost of spend on a particular job in order to fill up? Right? That could be some payments that you made to the consultant. That could be for advertising charges. That could be for copywriting charges. That could be for any other information, anything else that you paid as a commission or any other amount that you paid to an intermediary, so that you are able to get the right candidates, or you get access to that source where candidates have applied, to that database where potential candidates who are looking out for a job have applied. This is recruitment evaluation. It's a very important stage, so that we are able to find out whether we have done a good job of recruitment, and go back and see what is that we can correct. Right. Now coming to how do we go to recruit? So basically we have, once you identify the sources, as I told you, when we want to recruit, there are two sources that we prominently look for. One is an internal source and the other is an external source. So in the internal sources, we will be looking for job posting. So what's an internal source? An internal source is where you are looking for the right candidate within your organization. Right? Firms have a particular strategy called internal job posting. It's called IJPs. Okay, so wherever there is a vacancy that arises at a higher level or at a senior level or at the same level but with a different capacity, right? We always look for the first opportunity is often for internal candidates. The firm will always try scouting to see whether they will be able to find the right candidate to take up the job. So the existing employee who's right now doing a job, and if he or she is capable enough of taking up that new position that we have created, then we do that. How do we do that? We put it as IJP notices that goes on notice boards, or sometimes it is sent as an email to all the employees. Those who are eligible, or those who fit that job specification criteria, those who feel that they are confident enough to fulfill the job description, right? So when companies do the job posting, they will also send a copy of the job analysis. Right? So if I'm an employee of an organization, when I open my email and I find out that there is an opening in this particular department for so and so, and I go through the job analysis, then if I find that I have qualified myself over a period of time, my job specification, right away my profile matches the job specification, and when I read the description, I also understand that I am confident enough to take up these roles and responsibilities. So I might apply. So likewise, you could have many employees, existing employees applying or responding to that email and sending their CVs. And then the recruitment team will look at the selection process and then identify. We call this as internal job posting. Or sometimes this information is put out in newsletters for anybody to see. And then very importantly, organizations also do something called succession planning. Succession planning is grooming your junior level employees for mid-level jobs and mid-level employees for senior level jobs over a period of time. So that is what we do with promotion. firm does not have promotions, then what happens is if there is no growth. So employees in these organizations will usually quit, saying that I've been working in the same position for the last 8 years. I haven't been promoted. I've been doing the same job. Whereas somebody else in another organization, my colleague who joined with me, but in another organization has got 2 promotions over the last 8 years. So why has that colleague of yours got uh, 2 promotions? Because that organization has promoted him, has followed a policy of succession planning. Whereas in your organization, it is not happening. Right? So we do this. And then we have external sources. So when we realize that we are unable to find anybody suitable for doing the job within the organization, we start looking outside. And as all of you are already familiar, that we put out advertisements. Right? Again, when you advertise, you have to make sure that the advertising, source, whether it's going to be a company-related advertisement that you're going to send. I mean, it's for internal circulation among your industry members. So there are these industry bulletins that are, like for example, iron and steel bulletin. So that iron and steel bulletin will have information or editorials that will be written, articles that will be written by all of them who are working in the iron and steel industry, where they talk about trends, they talk about development, and so on. So you also put up an advertisement in the iron and steel bulletin. So what happens is this gets circulated only in that industry. Those in the iron and steel business and those who are working in this particular industry are the ones who will get access to it. And then if they feel that they are capable enough, they can apply for the job. Or you can send it out in any of the popular media that we have. It could be print media, or it can be broadcast media, or digital signage also today works in a great way, or email advertisements also work in a great way. So you can find out. But you need to find out that whichever source of advertising that you are choosing, or whichever medium that you are choosing, you will have to make sure that it reaches out to a big number, a vast pool of potential candidates. Okay? If you just put up an advertisement in the newspaper which is not read by potential candidates who want to work in your organization, it makes no sense. Right? So you should be aware of this. And then a very good way of trying to get the right candidates is the employment agencies. And today we call them as HR consulting firms. Right? If you're looking at unskilled laborers or semi-skilled laborers for your factory or any other production unit, you can always go to the employment exchanges. But over the time, employment exchanges have not been able to successfully give you some good candidates. You can always go to HR consulting firms. The time a dozen HR consulting firms, and these firms specialize according to industry. Right. So if you are from a particular industry and if you're looking for hiring, employees for your organization, you can always go to this industry-specific employment consultants or industry-specific HR consultants. And there are also a lot of contractors who are there in this market, the job market. So contractors, right? So a good many number of employees, almost about 80% of employees in many organizations are on a contract. Because they're hired directly. They're not hired directly by the company, but hired through a contractor. So contractor is one of these consulting agencies or recruitment consulting agencies who will have these candidates and they will supply candidates. So what happens is it helps us to cut down costs because companies today have largely outsourced the recruitment to third-party agencies, and these contractors and consulting firms those third-party agencies. Another very interesting source is the headhunting. We also have headhunting agencies. Right? These are very specialized HR recruiters. Right? Now, these are recruiting firms that will be able to get that very high-profile candidate who's right now at the top level of some company. Right? Coaching. Right? They can coach some very fine leader of a particular organization by wooing them or giving them inducements and emoluments that they cannot deny the offer. So such kind of very high profile headhunters are also there. Like it could be like you you specify the person and tell, so and so is right now working this organization, as a strategy head who's taking care of APEC operations. We want that person to take up this particular leadership position in my organization. So go ahead and get that person. So you can also specify and say who you want. So headhunting agencies today are so specialized; they can go to any extent to get that right person for the right job. So they'll start negotiating with that person. And obviously, everybody is looking to grow. Everybody is looking to succeed in that very little span of time that they have. So that's how many top profiles resign from leading organizations and take up jobs wherever headhunting firms are asking them to take. And then popularly, we have the campus recruitments where we look for freshers. And then referrals, we call these as employee referrals, a very effective way of hiring candidates. If you're looking at lesser numbers, if you're looking at about 2 candidates or 3 candidates, just to very quickly find somebody to take up these positions, you can always use employee referrals, which is an existing employee of the organization will refer somebody who he or she thinks will fit to that particular vacancy or will be able to get adjusted to the requirements of the organization. Word of mouth is another common thing where you spread the word not just with employees but with anybody else that you need. Say we are hiring, if anybody is interested, please let us know. It does also happen to WhatsApp forwards today, so that's also a very popular way of trying to get applicants. Unsolicited applicants, right? Unsolicited applicants are those candidates who applied for an organization when the organization hasn't called for recruitment drive. Right? Is not right now recruiting, but candidates feel that let's try. Let me try by sending my application, and if I get a call. So sometimes what happens is you may get right candidates through this unsolicited source. You may get a candidate who's applied, right? Instead of just saying that we don't need it and then put it in spam or just to tear that CV and throw it away. You can always file it and keep it for record. Somewhere in the future, if you feel a requirement, and then if you say, I remember about 1.5 months ago, we had somebody who applied. I feel that profile suits the requirement that we have right now. Right? If that's the case, then you can go back to that particular application, find the numbers, call the person, and find out whether that person is interested to take up the position right now. So these are unsolicited applicants. Very often, recruitment is through solicitation. Company is giving an invitation for welcoming candidates to apply. That is called solicited or a process of solicitation. Unsolicited is unwelcome, uninvited. So somebody just sending a CV when we're not inviting anybody to apply for a job. Then we have recruitment. That has changed the game. Today you have various sources like LinkedIn, and then you have so many other job recruitment portals that have really revolutionized the recruitment space and has enabled more and more candidates and more companies to get in touch with whoever they want and then be able to get anybody within a very, very short span of time. Right? So 2 very interesting sources that is very, very important for us if we have to look at recruitment and trying to see where we can get the right candidate. So please remember, where do we choose? When do we say internal is good or when do we say external is good? So for that also there are reasons when you should go for looking for candidates internally and when you should go looking for candidates outside your organization and possibly looking for new candidates that you work for. So what are the advantages of recruiting somebody internally? Right? So what do we have? So let's have somebody to read that for us. Okay, Alina Viju, if you can read this. Can you read the recruitment advantages of internal recruitment? Alina Viju. All right, Nikita George, can you read this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Advantages. Yes, sir. Advantages of internal recruiting: better assessment, lower cost, motivator for good performance, Hire at entry level only, familiarity with organization, improved morale and security can identify long-term interests.
Right. So these are the good reasons for looking internally. One is better assessment because so and so is already an employee of your organization. So you've already seen what he or she has done in your organization, the current job that they are doing. It will not take a lot of time to figure out whether this candidate will be the right person or not. Second is absolutely no spending. You don't have to spend a single rupee because the candidate is already there. You're only trying to see whether this candidate can fit the requirement that we have in place. Third, motivator for good performance. So what happens when an existing employee gets hired for a higher level position? It motivates that person because he's been recognized for good work. Then the morale goes spreads to everybody within the organization. But everybody begins to learn this lesson that good performance will obviously be recognized. Good performance will always help us to grow in the organization, and the organization is always looking out for good performance. So motivator for good performance. So that is going to help. And then hire at entry level only. Like for example, if you're trying to get somebody to work at a certain level where you don't know whether how an external candidate will work. These are important, especially when we've created a new job and we don't know how this job is going to grow or how this job is going to evolve over a period of time. So in that case, instead of experimenting with somebody from outside, we can always try an internal to take up that position until we perfect the job. And then you know that the internal employee is familiar with the organization policy, culture, is an insider, basically, so will not have an issue. Improve morale and security, as I said, the motivation, encouragement level increases within the organization, and employees feel secure that there is this organization that's creating so many opportunities for them, and then when they do well, they will obviously be recognized, and then can always identify with long-term interest, which means they will be ready to learn, reskill, upskill, improve themselves, be able to perform well, hone their capabilities. All of that will happen because they know that in future they have a long prospect in the organization. So good performance, if they continue to perform well, they will be able to get, they can elevate themselves to higher level positions in the organization. Right? But it also has several disadvantages. So we also feel that internal recruitment has often not given us what we have been looking for. Right? Ayush, Joe, you can read the disadvantages.
Yes, sir. Disadvantages of internal recruiting: inability to find appropriate people, morale problems, political infighting, need for strong T&D programs.
Yeah. What are the disadvantages? One is inability to find the right person. So you have a job analysis, but since you are looking internally, you may not get the right match. You may not get somebody who matches that perfect. You may get somebody just around 65% or 70% matching the requirement, but not up to the mark. Right. So in that case, what happens is you end up compromising. You end up compromising by taking that 65% candidate and then trying to help the candidate to improve and learn over a period of time by giving him or her on the job training. Second is going to give rise to a lot of moral problems. So that is where favoritism, bias, prejudice, and all these kind of biases creep into the organization when the organization has not set a criteria, has not fixed the criteria as to who can be promoted or who gets a higher level job. And if this criteria is not clearly communicated, and if this criteria is not known to everybody so that everybody can be eligible, anybody within the organization is eligible and they start working for this criteria, that they know that this is the criteria. So hence they start preparing themselves, skilling themselves, qualifying themselves, and so on. So it should be like that. It shouldn't be like a surprise that one fine day that you come and you pick a candidate and say this is the candidate. Whereas others may think that had we been told all of this in advance, we would have also worked for it. Right? And wherever selection of an internal candidate is devoid of criteria, or if it is because of favoritism, or it's because of bias or because of prejudice or because of some sort of stereotyping that is common. And then when other employees within the organization are unable to see the clear job-related reason why a particular candidate was chosen for this particular position and not others, and if they feel that there were other deserving candidates better than the one who was selected, it gives rise to a lot of infighting, gives rise to a lot of uh, small groups emerging within the organization, a certain kind of resentment within the organization, certain kind of demoralized situation or climate within the organization. And then, if you have hired somebody who's just about a 65% fit, so how is that remaining 35% going to be? How are you going to make the 65% fit employee become 100%? So that is where company will have to spend on training and development and give enhanced on-the-job training for this candidate so that the remaining 35% can be filled up for this candidate. So the company will have to spend time, money, energy, effort, and put in a lot of things waiting for this candidate to become 100%, by giving them time to learn on the job. So that's where the D&D program needs to be a little stronger if you have to groom these internal candidates to take up higher level positions. So what are the advantages of hiring somebody from outside? What are the advantages? All right, Farzeen, Sunil. All right, Neeraj, you can read this for us. The advantages of external recruitment.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you read this for us?
Sure, sir. Advantages of external recruiting: introduces new ideas and knowledge, reduced need for training, larger skilled pool available.
Okay, so the biggest advantage of hiring an external candidate is you're getting a fresh candidate with new ideas, new knowledge, somebody who's not an insider, somebody who's worked with several organizations, gained a lot of experience working in those organizations and that industry. So they come with new ideas, they come with new perspective, they come with new knowledge. So the new always helps in transforming the organization. Second, right, it reduces your need for training and development and allowing the candidate to learn on the job. You're getting a 100% match, right? So the disadvantage that we saw in internal recruitment, you're getting a 65% fit candidate, and that's the best that we have. But whereas you can look outside, your external job market is huge. You can always identify somebody who's a 100% fit, so you don't have to compromise on somebody who's not uh, close to the job or somebody who's not nearly eligible to the job. You can find a perfect candidate, and that perfect candidate will be able to do the job. And then you get a vast pool. Vast pool in the sense the external source will be able to give you more candidates. From those more candidates, you can always do a good job of identifying the right person who can take up the right position in your organization. Right, and then finally, let's look at the disadvantages of external recruitment. What are the disadvantages of external recruitment? Lekana, can you read this?
Sir,
Yeah.
disadvantages of external recruiting, problems of fit, moral problems of internals, adjustment period, relocation costs, decreased incentive value of promotions.
All right, problems of it. So the external has worked in a different organization and a different place, different industry, different organization culture. So when they come and join your organization, there is going to be some difficulty in terms of adjusting with existing culture, policy, people, and so on. So problems of it. Secondly, what happens is when the organization overlooks internal recruitment and then often tries to hire candidates only from external recruitment, then it's going to give rise to a lot of moral issues within the organization because internal employees, some of them could feel that they were better qualified for this job or they were good enough to do this job that has been vacant instead of the organization looking for an external an internal, then they would have fit the role much better. So that gives rise to a certain resentment within the mind of the employees. They feel dissatisfied that good performance has not been considered, has not been valued, and so on. Thirdly, external candidate will take time to adjust. Fourth, sometimes they may have to relocate. They're moving from a different place, their climate, culture, city, family, finding it difficult to adjust. Children finding it difficult to adjust. All of that issues will also be there. And then if an organization continues more and more with external recruitment, then what happens is the value of promotion, right? That whole growth aspect of promotion within your organization will lose its sheen, will lose its incentive, will lose its value, right? So organizations, employees in such kind of organizations where only external candidates are hired and preferred over internal candidates, these kind of organizations, employees will generally quit. They may say there is no growth, then they may decide to resign. So your organization will lose out on employees. So that's a big disadvantage that we have when it comes to recruitment. Okay, so that's where we look at the two sources and then we look at the pros and cons of both of this. Then finally, so once this is done, what happens is once we go to the sources, identify the right candidates, get the right people, and then what we do is we pass over this information to the selection team. The selection team is going to identify the right candidate. Once they are able to identify the right candidates, do the selection process, and they finally find the candidates and they complete the job. Once selection is over, then we've identified the right candidate for the various vacancies that we had in the organization, we will do something called recruitment evaluation. Okay. So recruitment evaluation is done using 4 criteria. All right, Akhil, can you read this for us? Akhil, can you read this for us? Right, Yashaswini.
Measuring
Yeah, that way you always right.
measuring past recruitment can help predict timelines of recruitment, budget needed, methods that yield greatest number of best quality candidates, assess performance of recruiters.
Okay, so 4 criteria that we're looking at. One is whether the recruitment was fulfilled within a particular time that we had fixed within the deadline. And secondly, whether we have been able to complete the task within the budget that was given. And then which are the methods, as a recruiter, when you planned your recruitment strategy, then you went about trying to implement it so that you could get the highest quality of potential candidates. Which method gave you the best result? Which source gave you the best result? Which campus where you got good number of fresh candidates? So which HR consulting firms gave you some of the finest candidates? Right. So all of these is an evaluation so that you get to know which of these sources and which are the consultants and which are the various strategies that work for you. So next time when you do your recruitment, you can always implement those strategies that yielded the best results. And then finally, it's going to be the performance appraisal of the recruiters themselves. Right. So whether they fulfilled the requirement that was there as part of the job analysis, and whether the selectors have given a good opinion about whether the recruiters have done a good job. And then the top management is also going to be looking at you very keenly and see whether you have done your job and whether you've identified the right candidates, went to the right sources, did the right kind of communication, did the right kind of negotiation, and then whether you were able to complete the task fully well. Okay, so that is where we're going to be looking at how well recruitment has gone about, how well recruiters have done their job. Right. So once this part is over, then we go to the selection. So as I said, once we are able to identify the right sources, and the right sources have given us the right candidates have applied for the jobs that are vacant, then we go to the selection process. So what is selection? What do we do with selection? So this is where I want you to very clearly understand the role or the differentiating role between recruitment and the differentiating role with selection. Right, Ophelia, can you read this? Ophelia, can you read this for us? All right, Rani, Bridget,
Yes, sir.
can you read this?
Selection is the process of gathering information for the purposes of evaluating and deciding who should be hired under legal guidelines for the short and long-term interests of the individual and the organization.
All right. So please look at this particular definition very, very carefully. What is selection? Selection is a process of gathering information. Please remember, as selectors, what is your attitude and what is your behavior when you are going to be sitting on the selection panel? On the selection panel, you are sitting there only to gather information. We're not there to pass judgment. Please remember, while we are sitting on the selection panel, there is enormous room for us to make perceptual errors. Many of the errors that you studied in perception are something that will very often come and blind your eyes when you are looking at a candidate. So it's always important that you don't go by a stereotype, you don't go by your first impression, don't go by a certain bias that you have because of the profile of a candidate or because of the physical appearance of the candidate. Right? So it's always important that you see that you sit very neutrally, that you see circumstances, you sit and look at the candidate with fresh pair of eyes. Okay? So selection is only a process of gathering information. Right? And you're going to be gathering all of this job-related information that you want from the candidate. Why? Because that information is what you're going to be using to decide whether this person is the right person for the job. Not of the information that you think that you have gathered. Right? So that is where bias, stereotype, all of this can come in because the moment we see a person, we come to a perceptual judgment. That is not an information that you have gathered from the candidate. That is an information because of your perception of the candidate. So it's always important that you look into what information the candidate has given to you. It could be information that the candidate is giving in the CV. It could be information that you are gathering while the candidate is performing in any of those rounds that you have in the selection process. And all the decision that you're going to make, whether to hire the candidate or not hire the candidate, is only going to be on the information that you have gathered. That's the first point. Second is to make sure that you are hiring a candidate within the legal compliance or the guidelines. There are two policies that we have. One policy is within the organization. One internal selection guidelines. So recruiters very often look at the internal selection guidelines that is put forth by the management, and then we use that as a criteria to make a decision of choosing the candidate. The second thing is there is a legal law that is there in the country. Right? Article 14 of the Indian Constitution says is the right for equality, talks about right for equality. So if you are going to be rejecting a candidate on the basis of some other criteria but not criteria related to job, so that means you are denying an opportunity for equal employment. So the candidate can go and file a case or a complaint against you for having discriminated this candidate because of some other non-job related reason. That can land recruiters and selectors into a legal quagmire. Can put you into serious trouble. So that's why it's very important that you make sure that you follow the law of the land. And you make sure every decision that you're going to take is going to be within the compliance of the selection guidelines of your organization and the laws, employment laws that are enacted in the country. And that's for the good short-term and the long-term interest of the individual and then of the organization. To make sure that the individual is selected for the right organization, the organization has made the right efforts to select the right candidate to work with them. So that is what selectors should be doing while they are sitting on the panel and trying to make sure that they are getting the right candidate. So what are the steps in the selection process? All right, the first major step that we have, the first preliminary step that we have is the screening of applications. So the recruitment process comes to an end when all the CVs pile up on the table, or when all CVs come into the inbox of the recruitment team. So once we have a sizable pool of candidates and we know that we fairly got a good number of candidates who apply, then we are ready for selection. So what do? We screen the applications. We go through the application and find out whether all the information that is given in the application by a given candidate is matching the job analysis. If information is not matching the job requirement, for example, it could be information that is more than what we require, or it could be lesser than what we require, underqualified and overqualified. Both these cases we reject. Second, once all of them who are selected or shortlisted will go to face a couple of tests. So tests are going to be an integral part of the selection process because we have numbers, large number of candidates applying. So how do we shortlist? We have to put them on certain tests, right? There are different tests that are designed by different organizations according to their requirements. So we have that. Third, we have interviews. So we have interviews. Again, shortlisted candidates who come out of the tests will be asked to come for an interview. Interview will have a very limited number of candidates. Not everybody will be allowed to go for an interview because it takes a lot of time and resource. And then we do some reference checks later on once somebody gets shortlisted and then we zeroed in on the candidates. We do a little bit of background verification to just verify that all the details that they have presented to us in the CV or presented or told us about all of that they have done so far to the interviewers to check whether all of that is valid. So we verify. We also subject candidates to a medical examination so that we find them to be physically and mentally fit for the organization. Right? So these are the different broad templates of the selection process, but all of this gets customized. We can add a few more to it. We can customize all of this according to the organization, according to the job requirement, because all of the selection criteria will be designed only after studying the job analysis. Right? Because when you are selecting a candidate, you are trying to find out whether the candidate will be able to fulfill the requirements of the job description. So all the criteria that we're going to have, or selection criteria, selection rounds, are going to be pulled out from the job analysis. So that's the reason why it's very important for us to write the job analysis very well, because every other function in HR, every other decision is going to be purely based on job analysis. Right? So that's why it's very, very important. So we can design tests according to what is there in the job description so that we know if somebody can do this job, interviews, reference checks. Okay. So that's what we have as the steps in selection process. Then when we come back, we will look at a little more detailed into the different types of tests and interviews, and we can go ahead and complete this process. Right, I'm going to stop with this.